my first time doing an unboxing video. I'm so excited. Unfortunately, I did have to wait a little bit to actually open the package, as torturous as it was. So I had actually been seeing advertisements for this sketchbook through Facebook, Instagram, everywhere, and I had this nagging feeling that I had to get it. So the Mossery Sketchbook company actually worked with an artist called MCMINTEA to create a series of sketchbooks, the one with the tulips and the dragonfly. I believe this artist has actually done a couple different sketchbooks for them. My mom absolutely loved dragonflies. Everything had to be about dragonflies. And so I found this sketchbook, and it felt like she was standing behind me and urging me to just get this sketchbook. And so I ordered the sketchbook, and I don't regret it at all. So let's jump right in. All right. So this is from a company called Mossery, and they are actually based in Malaysia. So during the time of COVID, it was actually a little nerve-wracking to be ordering a product from overseas when mail and everything has been like stopped up. Yeah, they had my sketchbook personalized and sent to me like 30 minutes after ordering it. I got it within like a week, and this was like right smack dab in the middle of pandemic time. So yeah, it was pretty awesome. The box that it comes in is just absolutely gorgeous. Whoops, looks like I forgot some tape. Handy dandy knife. Presentation for these sketchbooks is awesome. Like, they actually take time to package it up all really nice, so to make sure that the sketchbook actually gets to you in like pristine condition, which I super appreciate. I love the pin too. So the pin was pretty awesome because it was like the first 100 people got a pin with their sketchbook, and I don't really use pins all that much, but I know my mom would have approved of this pin, so I'm very excited to have that in my collection. And so yeah, the box has these drawstrings that's really cool and just super fancy, and it's like, am I really opening a sketchbook? So not only did they give me coupon codes that I'll buy more sketchbooks from them, which I probably will, they also sent me a little pamphlet that has a bunch of Inktober drawings that people did in their sketchbooks from last year. So not only was the packaging for this sketchbook amazing, but the sketchbook itself is gorgeous. I love touching the cover of this sketchbook. And the awesome thing about these new Mossery sketchbooks is that they actually can be replaced, like the paper inside can be replaced. So you can keep the cover and just swap out the sketchbooks. So you can just write the year that it's done and put it on the bookshelf. I actually need to add, this is not my first Mossery sketchbook. A friend of mine actually gave me a Mossery sketchbook a couple of years ago. So this sketchbook, actually, you cannot remove the pages at all. It is just a sketchbook, and you have that cover for the rest of your life, so make sure that's a good one. Oh, they look so cool side to side. Oh, I can't wait to put some artwork in these. All right, let's take a look at, actually, we should probably put this back in the little thing. Why are you fighting me? Stop, okay, I got it, cool. All right, let's take a look inside the sketchbook. So the first couple of pages in these sketchbooks are actually set up a lot like journaling, so you can keep track of like your inspirations, songs, values, and beliefs. I am definitely going to be using the books and places because I've been doing a lot of traveling. And 3 things to improve, change, or achieve. I have so many goals, and I love that this is set up like a bullet journal. I love bullet journaling. I do it every day. And so this comes with the dot grids so that you can do your bullet journaling in your sketchbook, which I'm going to try to use for like keeping track of my art goals and stuff. So the paper for this first sketchbook is nice. It is such good touch. It has a lot of tooth on it, so you can use a lot of dry mediums on it, which I'm hoping to test out later. And so comparing with the other one, the sketchbook is similar. They did change a lot of things. There's a lot of grid in here. They didn't actually have the dots, which I like both, so I'm not really too picky about that. And it still has all the inspiration boards and everything, but it's a little more open, so you can do what you want with it. And now we get to the awesome paper. So Once I started flipping through these sketchbooks, I realized that I actually did not order the same paper for the new sketchbook that I got. So the one that my friend gave me is actually the watercolor paper, so it's a lot thicker than the mixed media paper that is in the newer sketchbook. Despite these sketchbooks having different paper weights, they both have like a nice amount of tooth or texture to them, so it'll be able to pick up a bunch of different drawing or painting mediums on it. I cannot stress how good this paper feels. It is such good touch. I personally appreciate sketchbooks that give you a little area to store like extra bits of paper and things. So now that we have gone through both sketchbooks, it's time to actually start making marks in them. I'm very excited for this. I've been holding on to one of these sketchbooks for such a long time, and I've got this new pretty sketchbook that I can't wait to start putting some artwork in, and we'll see how both compare. All right, let's get some art done. So with any new sketchbook, I try to swatch out any of the materials that I use just to see how it reacts with the paper. So I have my mechanical pencils here that I like to use. Next up, I have my Palomino Blackwing 602 and Blackwing Pearl pencils. And I have these line art pens that I got from a Tuesday morning. They're really cheap and I decided to pick them up just to play with. Next up, I have one of my buckets of Multiliners, Copic, and there's some Sakura pens in there. And then I have my massive collection of Sakura Pigma Micron pens that I got for Christmas. And they are gorgeous. I love this set so much. Next up is some Prismacolor colored pencils, because I like to use colored pencils in illustrations to add in extra details. So it'll be very fun to play with all these colors again. And I have my Dr. P.H. Martins that I would like to test in here because I have watercolor paper and these watercolors are awesome. So gotta test them. The next art supply that I have to use in these sketchbooks is my alcohol-based markers. So the ones that I'm gonna focus on for these sketchbooks is my collection of Copic markers. So I love my Copic markers. I've been collecting Copics since I was a teeny bopper in college and found out about these markers and how awesome that they were for illustrating and that all the pros used them. So I started buying them one by one until I finally got all the markers, and I even have some in there that I just have of custom colors that I've mixed myself using the marker inks. So this will be a fun experiment, hopefully, so that I can use these markers more. Having gone through the art supplies that I'm going to use now, we're actually going to start putting those into a sketchbook. So I've decided to get over that anxiety of putting the first line into paper is I've started going to the back of my sketchbooks to start swatching out things so that I get to test out my supplies on the paper and not necessarily worry about, I'm going to ruin the first page. I'm using the last page of the sketchbook and now I can focus on what it is that I want to do for the first one. So I'm testing out the pencils just to see how they feel on the paper. So far it's very nice with the Blackwing and the pearls and my little mechanical pencils. And after swatching those out, I'm going to test out my erasers because some paper is very forgiving when it comes to erasing and other paper is not. I am proud to say that the mixed media paper in this sketchbook is very forgiving and actually just let the lines go, which was nice. So next up for the pencil swatching is the watercolor paper from the sketchbook that my friend gave me a couple of years ago. This paper is a lot more toothier than the mixed media paper in the Dragonfly sketchbook. Despite it being a little bit toothier, I didn't notice it really messing up any of the art supplies, which paper that has a lot of tooth in it tends to wear down art supplies a little quicker. So with my pencil tests, I did not have to sharpen my pencils or use too much of the pencil lead as I thought that I was going to have to, which is nice. And I was happy to see that with the erasing test, it actually erased, which is great because I'm not one of those illustrators that likes to actually watercolor over my pencil lines. I find that it makes the watercolor really muddy, so this will be great because I can just erase the pencil and go over with some ink. So I'm pretty happy with the pencil test with both of these sketchbooks. I think that I actually prefer the watercolor paper as far as the pencils go. So after the pencil test, I'm going in and using some of the different inking pens that I have to see which ones that I actually want to use for an illustration. Unfortunately, with the KingArt Inkline pens, I don't know if it's the way that I was storing them, but they didn't really want to work with the paper. So I might need to test those again on something else, because the first time that I used them, they worked okay, but we'll just have to play around with it more. Maybe it just doesn't like this paper. So next up is the Sakura Pigma Micron pens, and I actually have no complaints about these pens whatsoever with this sketchbook because the ink was coming out nice and fluid, unlike the Copic multiliners that I was using, which I'll have to test more later because I don't know what's up with those. So next up I'm using some Copic markers. I really liked how these markers blended in with the paper. It actually looked like watercolor, which was awesome. And having tested that, I moved on to some Prismacolor Verithin colored pencils. They actually didn't have any issues with the colored pencils. The paper didn't show through as much as I thought that was going to. And after that, I'm using my Dr. P.H. Martin concentrated watercolors, which actually worked like the markers in the Copic swatch test. So I'm very happy with that, and I can't wait to play around with some watercolors in this sketchbook, which is going to be great because they just look gorgeous in the swatch test. Look at that. This is gonna be awesome. So you might not be able to see it too much in the video, but these colors are actually really bright and vibrant, which is awesome. And there was not a whole lot of bleed through even with the markers, so that is great. Always have a bleed sheet because you never know what's gonna bleed. I did the same test with the mixed media paper, and I had very similar results as I did with the watercolor paper. The KingArt Inklines worked a tad bit better, but it took some doing. The Sakura Pigma Microns, no issues anywhere. They worked just fine on this paper. I'm probably going to just use those for this little experiment because they're actually working. The Copic started to pick up a little bit more, so maybe it's just because I haven't been using them, so I'm gonna have to play around with these a bit more. So the Copic markers actually went on the paper just fine. I didn't really have any issues with the color going down at all and actually staying in the paper, which was nice. It did bleed through just a tad bit more, but that's what bleed sheets are for. So moving on to the Prismacolor Verithin colored pencils, I did notice that the paper was actually showing through, even though I was pushing down kind of hard on the colored pencils. So that's not bad. It is something that I'm not really used to with my coloring styles, since I don't like a whole lot of the paper to show through. So I just might need to use a little bit more pressure while I'm using those colored pencils. Although I did notice that a lot of the white from the paper actually was showing through with even the watercolors as I was putting them down. So if you're somebody that likes to have the color of the paper show through, then the mixed media paper is probably more of your speed. Never forget a bleed sheet. I'm actually just using an old envelope, but anything can be a bleed sheet. That way you don't ruin the paper on the back. So there was a little bit of bleed through with the mixed media, but that's to be expected since it is thinner paper. So with the swatches in place, I flipped back to the first page of the sketchbook and am now doing some light sketching. My mom absolutely loved it whenever I would show her a new drawing of an elf or a fairy, so for these first illustrations in these sketchbooks, I'm gonna stick to an elf theme for the first couple of drawings, because I think my mom would have liked that. I can definitely say with confidence I'm really enjoying sketching in this sketchbook with the multimedia paper. It's very smooth. My pencil doesn't have any problems just gliding over the paper of the sketchbook, which is very nice. Sometimes paper with tooth tends to snag any pencils that I use for sketching, so this was a nice pleasant surprise for this paper that it's actually smooth enough to where I can just effortlessly sketch. This mixed media sketchbook actually handled my super small Pentel .3 pencil like a champ, so I could get all the detail that I wanted to in there. So next up, I'm taking my kneaded eraser and I'm just rolling it over my pencil lines. So this is a great trick that I use to lift up the pencil so that there is just enough of a ghost so that I can go over and either sketch or line it again. So in the case of this test, what I'm actually doing is I did a rough sketch and now I'm going over and doing a more refined sketch of the little elf girl so that I can get some more confident and clean lines when I go in to do some inking. I'm gonna have to figure out something to put in her hand there. I think maybe some fruit. So right now I'm using the Palomino 602 Blackwing. This is actually one of my favorite pencils to use. You know what? Let's add a peach in there. I like peaches. It's peach season right now. Next up is that eraser trick so that I can have some clean lines to ink. And now we're gonna move on to the watercolor paper. So while I did a nice, cute, mom-friendly elf in the first sketchbook, for this watercolor sketchbook, I'm actually gonna do a little bit more of a seductive elf, just because I'm sweet and spicy. So now I gotta work on the spice. Also, there is a method to my madness. With the first sketchbook, the white tends to show through the paper a bit more, so I figured I would do kind of a nice, light-hearted illustration for that one, and then for this heavier paper, I wanted to do something where I could add a lot more color. I need to get rid of that face. I'm not digging this face right now. Maybe I'll do this. Let's get those eyes. That eye's looking kind of funky. One last time. What is life? So the pencil's actually, it's not snaggy on the paper, which is nice. No, I'm done with that mouth. Come on, it looks so much better. Okay, not the whole mouth, just, no. I swear I can draw mouths. So I wasn't having too many issues with the sketching portion of this. It even handled the 0.3 Pentel that I was using on the first sketchbook like a champ, which is awesome. I did feel a little bit more resistance with the sketching portion, and I attribute that to the tooth of the watercolor paper. Alright, I think we can just call that done. So now I move on to my handy dandy little eraser trick. The rolling I find actually works better in not smudging the image. I've seen some artists that just use the eraser like a normal one and that will smudge the image. So this paper does have a lot more tooth than the mixed media paper. So even though it didn't wear out the pencils as much as a lot of watercolor paper that I've used, there was a little resistance while sketching, but nothing too bad. Okay, I think we're just there. Erase, 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 erase. So this sketchbook, because of the tooth, was actually fighting me while erasing. It was a little bit of a struggle, but I won in the end. So now that we're back with the mixed media sketchbook, I'm going in with some Micron pens to add a little bit of line. I'm not adding a super amount of detail because, like my sketching, I do a light ink, usually with the smallest ink pen that I have, and then when I'm done with the color, I'll go in and add more inking to it and add in more details. Because I've noticed that no matter how long I wait to put color on any inking that I do, after I erase the ink, it removes a layer of the ink. Even if I let it sit for like an hour or a day, it will still remove a bit of the inking and leave it kind of splotchy. So I try to go in with the smaller pen first, and then I'll just go over with the bigger one when I'm done with the coloring portion. Also, I noticed that when coloring, it actually removes the tiniest bit of the ink. So I've found that this method works pretty well for me. So doing a almost sketch ink layer is also awesome because it gives you time to fix any mistakes. And if you use a smaller pen, if you make a major mistake, what you can do is you can take a harder eraser and you can actually erase some of the inking line. Although when you're using one of these erasers to erase ink, be careful, because what it's actually doing is removing small layers of the paper. So if you erase too hard, you'll actually make a hole in your paper. I know from pure personal experience, so learn from my mistakes and use caution. Unfortunately, with the way that I had my recording things set up, I couldn't get as close to the sketchbook as I wanted to, otherwise you guys would just be seeing my head the entire time. So I did notice that with the way that I was sitting and inking, the pens were actually kind of bouncing off the paper a little bit. So you can't really notice it with these sketchbooks where it is, but the lines were a little messier than I usually like my illustrations to look. Add in a little bit of a border. That's going to be so much fun to color later. I'm trying to get used to geometric shapes for illustrations because they can be so effective. And you don't need to put a background in there if you just have a fancy shape and some color in the shape. Despite the skipping, the image actually turned out really nice. I'm very excited to start coloring that. So now that this image is inked, I'm going to go in and take my Kneaded Eraser and I am just removing the rest of the sketch lines. This was actually fully erased about a day after I did the inking for this illustration. It's typically recommended that you let your ink sit for at least an hour to fully absorb into the paper. And even though this has been sitting for a day, some of the ink did lift up when I was erasing. So now that we're done with the first one, I wanted to move on to the inking for the second one. And this paper, because of how toothy it is, there was a lot of jumping around with the inking pens. So I made it work, and it actually is not turning out as bad as I thought that it was going to with how textured the paper was. So it was still pretty effective, though, due to the filming. I didn't get to get as up close and personal as I like to with my inking. So I'll have to test that out with the next illustration, and I'll just get as close to the paper as I want to. So really my only criticism with this paper is that because it's really toothy, is while using the microns, it did jump around a little bit, but that's my only complaint. The colors actually showed through nicely because I'm using colored multiliners, and I didn't have any issues with it dulling or anything, so I'm pretty happy with that. I would definitely recommend this sketchbook for anybody who does a lot of field watercoloring or just likes extra toothy textured thick paper, because that is the best way to describe this paper. Is it's thick, it's got tooth, and I have no doubts that this is going to be able to handle the amount of coloring that I want to do for this illustration. I'm going to add in a triangle this time. Did kind of a square-ish thing. Triangles are cool. Alright, so now that I've drawn some shapes and it is time to erase. Like the other one, I did let this, and just like the previous sketchbook, I actually let the ink sit on this one for about a day. There was a little bit more ink that came up off of this one, but I attribute that to the tooth, so I'm not too worried. That's why we do one layer of inking first. I actually love how these look next to each other. She's offering her a peach. Alright, now we get into the coloring. So with coloring, I like to add in a little bit of pink to the areas of the body that are usually a little bit pink. So the lips, cheeks, nose, and the tips of the ears. So I'll add in a layer of that, and then I'll go in and add a lighter color layer for the base. And this is actually a technique that you can use, which is the tip-to-tip technique, where if you take the two markers and you put them together, it actually lifts up some of the ink of the marker, and you can kind of paint with it, which is a great way to blend colors in. So I'll use that technique quite a bit for shading and adding in. So besides the tip-to-tip technique, I also like to lay down one color and then use a lighter version of that color to just push the pigments into the paper and around, so that I can get more of a consistent blend of colors. So I'll take a mid-tone color and lay that down, and use the lighter color to kind of smudge it out and blend it in. And typically when I'm doing shading, I'll actually use two colors. So I'll use one color for kind of like the mid-tone shade, and then I'll go in for a darker one for those harsher shadows. And the darker one I usually won't blend in too much, because I'll use that as more cell shading. I love cell shading my illustrations. I like to use a blend of cell shading and soft tone blending. It just adds a nice extra layer to the illustrations. So I'm going in with a slightly darker purple to kind of offset the orangeness of her skin, and so far it's turning out really nicely. I will say that this part of the process always intimidates me, because I see just the skin. It's like, it's too whatever, too dark, too chromatic, but then I just have to say, for anybody else who is feeling that, wait until the drawing is done before you like berate yourself over, I should have done this instead. Because once I start adding in the color for the hair and stuff, it actually looked better. Definitely prior to this, I thought that I had made her skin way too orange than I was originally going for, but then once I did the hair color, it started to look a lot better. Pink for the hair was definitely a good choice. It really helps offset the vibrancy of the orange in this character's skin. So, yay! I added my first light layer of pink. I'm going in with a stronger and darker pink to add in the first layer of shading before I move in for the third and final layer. And that third and final layer of shading for the hair is the dark purple to kind of blend in with the purple used for the skin. And I'm using a combination of the tip to tip technique and just putting down a solid color of purple for cell shading. Gonna add in a little bit more pink there to the fingers and the ears because it unfortunately got a little washed out with the additional colors that I added. Peaches are definitely like my top favorite fruit. I love peach everything. Peach tea, peaches themselves, peach flavored drinks and snacks. I love peaches. They're so delicious. Add in some shiny gold because gold is beautiful. Silver is too, but this elf likes gold. Shing, sparkle, sparkle. So now I'm going in with that marker that I used for the lighter portion of her skin tone to give the feeling of a lighter fabric, and to help achieve that I'm using a colorless blender to smooth out the inking a little bit, make it fade. Now I'm going to go in and add a little bit of I think a green background is going to be good here. I think I'm going to make it a little more saturated. It's a little too light. Bright and vibrant. She needs more bright color. Let's darken that up a little bit more. Just a wee bit. A little bit of an ombre. Alright, time to go in and add that extra inking. And it's definitely helping solidify the lines a bit more, which is awesome. Although I do notice that I'm having the issue with the skipping just a tad bit, but I mean, there are worse things for paper to do than skip. She's missing freckles. She needs just a lot of freckles on her. Freckle, 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 freckle. So many freckles. Alright, now that that's all done, I'm going in and I'm using a oil-based gold pen to add in some embellishments on her jewelry. And I love this pen. I got them from Michael's. I think it's the Craft Smart oil-based pens. The only problem with them is that they tend to leak, so make sure that you test it on a piece of paper before you go in and add details. So now I've switched over to a Posca white marker. So this is to add a little extra shinies because I love adding shinies to my artwork. So just makes it look a little more versatile. And now I'm going with those colored pencils to add in random strands of hair because that just makes the image kind of pull together, just throwing in some random lines like, her hair is wistfully blowing in the wind. And touch up some blush with a little colored pencil too. Colored pencils are great for marker illustrations because you just go in and add extra details, little finer details that you couldn't get. And you can also use like the white one like I'm doing right now to just add the illusion of the fabric being a little more darker than I had originally made it. I also like to go in with, I'm using a yellow right now to add in the illusion of a yellow light kind of coming from the top. And now I'm going in with a light blue to add in kind of the reflective blue that might be on the other side. Alright, so now we're back with our little seductive dancer elf. So I'm going in and using the pink and a light base tone that I'm using for the skin. I'm going to make her a little lighter since I definitely plan on making her hair and the cloak that she's holding a little darker. that tip-to-tip technique really works for these lighter skin tones because you can make the pink push through a little bit more. It also just works if you are somebody who likes to do shading with more of a blend to it. So it's definitely a good technique to play around with. Smudge, smudge, smudge. So now I'm going in with the secondary shadows and then the tertiary shadows. And I'm pretty happy with the fact that I've given her like a more dynamic pose and a little bit less clothing to work with, because I get to play around with the skin tone a little bit more than I did with the first illustration. So moving on to hair, I'm adding a dark red to act as a highlight and base tone for this illustration. Unfortunately, red has this nasty habit of leaking out of the lines a little bit, so I use a colorless blender to kind of push the ink back in, which is a very helpful technique. So having put the red in place, I now go in with two dark warm grays. One is, I think it was W8 and the other one was W10, to darken that hair up a bit more, not just make it striking red. So you can't really tell at this point in the process, but I'm actually using a lot of ink. And the paper is holding up amazingly well to the amount of ink and pressure that I'm putting onto it, which is great. For the most part done, I'm going in and just adding that second layer of inking to just draw in some details and just enunciate some portions of the artwork, like the eyes and lips and some of the hand and little bits of the hair. Now I'm going with those colored pencils to add in little extra fine details that I couldn't really get with the markers. Some secondary and primary lights, and then of course have to go in with my gold, make it extra shiny and pretty. And this I'm just using for all of her jewelry, with the exception of the arm cuffs. This is going to be so shiny. Now I'm going to go with that little white Posca pen again, add a little bits of dots and some hard lines to the skirt. Alright, I'm gonna call this done. I'm so happy with how these sketchbooks held up with the amount of materials that I was using on them. Even through heavy ink usage, there is not a whole lot of bleed through on the paper, especially with the watercolor paper, and I was not holding back with the inking. And they did great. The colors look awesome on them. There was no like desaturation or anything. I mean, look at that. It's awesome. And this was using marker, ink, and colored pencil, and it just worked so seamlessly well with this paper. So I can definitely say that both sketchbooks I'm very happy with. I would order both papers again, and I'm gonna have to try these out with my watercolors next time. Thank you so much for coming to my first unboxing and review video, hopefully the first of many. So don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye!